Hello DSW students. Last week we did our first of 2 nutrition classes, and in that class we looked at what our body needs from food. So it needs energy, it needs building blocks, raw building materials, and it needs components to be able to run chemical reactions. So that's how our cells do their jobs, is by running chemical reactions. We also looked at a breakdown of all of the specific nutrients that our body needs. So we looked at macronutrients, so nutrients that we need in larger amounts like carbohydrates, proteins, fats, water. And we also looked at micronutrients, so nutrients that our body needs in just smaller amounts, things like vitamins and minerals. And while I think that that is really important background information, I think we need to be able to speak the language of nutrition. We need to know what are the individual nutrients. I do believe that counting specific numbers of calories and counting specific amounts of nutrients is not a very sustainable way to eat a healthy diet. So we're still compiling that background information, but our overall goal is really to come up with a strategy that can be used in a practical way when we go to the grocery store or when we plan a menu, for dinner, for example. So in this class, we're going to look at combining those nutrients together and ultimately coming up with our nutritional utopia. So how can we find out the nutrient values of the foods that we eat? So we know that we need a certain amount of carbohydrates and proteins and fats and vitamin C and so on, but how do we actually know how much is in the food that we eat? Well, there's a couple ways that you can do this. So one way is there are some really great online food databases, and this is a good one here. It's called eatracker.ca, and you can put in foods, you can put in whole meals, you can put in whole days, and the program will ultimately determine a nutrient breakdown for each of the individual food items or groups of items that you select. So for example, in this case, this is an example of one of the printouts, and you can see here that this is what this person had for breakfast, lunch, dinner. It gives you your total calories, the amount of grams of fat, grams of proteins, grams of carbohydrates, and so on. And you can get it right down to how much vitamin C or how much calcium or so on. Some of these sites even allow you to enter new foods or recipes into its database. So even though its food isn't, it may have gala apples in its database, but it may not have Honey Crisp. And so you could even get as specific as that, or you could enter your grandmother's lasagna recipe and it will give you a nutrient breakdown. So don't get me wrong, these food databases are amazing, and they're great if you wanted to get a snapshot of how much you ate. A good way to do that would be to enter 2 weekdays and 1 weekend day into this, just to get an idea of, on average, what are you eating per day or per week. It's also good if you wanted to track a particular nutrient. So if you were low on iron and you wanted to see if you are getting enough iron in your diet, or calcium, or a specific type of nutrient, am I having too much sodium, then again you could keep track of what you're eating for a couple days. Again, usually it's good to have 2 weekdays and 1 weekend day, so a Saturday or a Sunday, just because we eat differently in the weekdays and weekends, and that kind of gives us an average of what we're consuming. So you could do that and get a sort of a rough estimate of, am I consuming too much sodium, and then you'd know, okay, I want to start to choose foods that have less in sodium. But this method is not really handy on a day-to-day basis. It's not handy when you're at the grocery store, to select foods, and it's really not, it's very tedious to enter everything, and it's not that great for menu planning. So we need something else. Another place that we can get information about the nutrient content of foods is food labeling. Now in Canada, all packaged food must be labeled with 2 different things: a nutrition facts label, which is what we see here on the right, and a list of ingredients. And the list of ingredients has to be in descending order by proportion or percent by weight. So the number one item that you see in the list of ingredients is the item that is contained in the largest amount, either by weight or proportion in that particular product, and so on down the line. So in this case, this product contains mostly corn flour, followed by sugar, followed by peanut butter, and so on. Food labeling, again, it would be very tedious to go around and look at all the labels and add up, how much carbohydrate we're consuming or how much sodium that we're consuming. So it's not really good. The database is a better tool for looking at, how much sodium we're consuming in a day, for example. However, food labeling is extremely useful when you're at the grocery store and you want to make comparisons between different products and you want to make choices between products. So this labeling became mandatory in 2005, but there were some problems that were identified with labeling, and interestingly enough, they were problems that we identified in our class, and so they made some changes in 2017. And the industry has about 5 years to comply to this. So I'm going to show you what's the old food labeling looked like, and I'm going to show you what the new food labeling is going to look like. And when you go shopping right at this moment, you may see some labels that have already been adapted for the new policies, and you may see some old ones. So you're going to have to be on your toes when you're doing your comparison. In general, the nutrition facts label always has a serving size. So this is the amount that all of these numbers relate to. And it may be in cups, it may be by weight, and ideally it's a realistic serving size. So realistically, for example, when I have a bowl of cereal, I usually have at least a cup of cereal. I don't have half a cup of cereal. So ideally, the serving size would be its realistic portion size. However, that hasn't been so in the past, and that's one of the things they're going to change. It also tells you how many total calories are in this product. It tells you fat, and it has to divide the fat into saturated fat and trans fat. It has to give you those amounts of the total fat. Cholesterol, sodium, total carbohydrates, including the amount of fiber and the amount of sugars, proteins, and various vitamins and minerals that are in the product. Okay, so here are some of the changes, and I really am impressed with the changes that they have made. So one of the changes that they've made has to do with the serving size, so making the serving size realistic. So for example, on a bag of chips, if they say right now that the serving size is 15 chips, and you know that most of the time when you pick up one of those small bags of chips, you don't eat 15 and you don't count, you just eat the whole bag. That's how I do it anyway. So now they're going to have to say, that they have to list the serving size as the entire bag. The other thing they're doing is they're making the serving size more consistent between products, so that when you're looking at products, then you can compare them. So I'm going to show you some examples there. So here the serving size is realistic, and it's similar on similar foods. They've made the calories kind of stand out in bold so it's easily seen. They have also updated, based on science, the percent of daily value. So Health Canada recommends that we get a certain amount of a substance per day based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet. And we've had some changes in the science since they originally started food labeling, and so now they've changed some of those amounts. They have now added here, which I think is really good, these are added sugars, and they have a percent of what you should be taking in your daily sugars, added sugars. So which is really what we're looking at, is not to go above a maximum. So in 1 cup of this particular product, you're getting about 1/4 of your daily sugar intake, of what your daily sugar intake should be at max. So that's a valuable piece of information too. They are updating some of the minerals and micronutrients that they're listing. So for example, most people get enough vitamin A and C in their diet, but oftentimes they're missing in potassium or calcium or iron. So they're listing those, and they're also giving a little footnote. It used to just say that, for example, in one serving of this product you would get 10% of your daily potassium intake. Well, what does that mean? Is that a lot or is that a little? And so what they're saying here is if it's 5% or less, it's really not a great source for that particular nutrient. So this isn't a great source for calcium. But if it was 15% or more, then that's a lot, and that would be a good product to pick if you were looking at increasing your calcium intake. Here are some other examples. So it used to be, for example, if you got a thing of milk here, in this case it's nearly 2 cups of milk, and it would say this is one of those little lunch cartons, and this says that your serving size is per cup. And of course, really, you don't drink half of your lunch milk carton, you drink the whole thing. So now it has to be a full carton. Some other things in terms of comparison, bread is a really big one. So they'll list a serving size as 1 slice of bread, for example, particularly if the slices are big, and that's so that they don't look like their bread has lots of calories. However, when you're comparing with more thinly sliced bread, then they would say 2 slices, and that looks like, oh, bread A might be a better choice. So now they will all have to list 2 slices as their serving size, because that's typically what people eat. They usually eat 2 slices of bread. So again, the other same thing with yogurt. Some yogurts have their serving size as 1/3 of a cup, some 1/2 of a cup, and so how do we compare? If we want to pick a yogurt that has less sugar, how do we know when their unit size is different? And so now they're going to try to make them consistent. So both of them will say their serving size is 3/4 of a cup. So those are some of the changes that they're making, and that's going to make it easier. And this is the whole point of the labels, and I'm a big advocate for reading the labels of what you buy. And that's because you need to use it to choose. So if I'm looking at bread and I'm thinking, okay, I want something that doesn't have a lot of salt in it, and I definitely want to have it with whole grain, then I want to read the labels and choose the best product that's available there for me. They're also asking to do some changes on their list of ingredients, and I think this is important too, and particularly when it comes to sugar. So the more research that we do, especially recent research, we are realizing that a lot of the chronic issues, heart issues, type 2 diabetes, cancers, are linked with our extra sugar consumption. Now, sugar itself is not a bad food. It's not on my list of 1 bad food. But too much sugar definitely causes a lot of problems. And our issue is that when we process food, we add a ton of sugar to it. Now, remember that I said that when companies have to list their ingredients, they have to list it in terms of which ingredient is in the largest proportions by weight or volume, and that gets listed first, and then they list the other things in decreasing amounts that are in that product. Well, so that a product didn't want to have sugar as its #1 ingredient. And so what they would do is they would break down the sugars into different components. So for example, in this product, it contains fancy molasses, which is sugar, brown sugar, and then regular sugar. And in fact, there are about, at least 50 different names for sugar. And so what the companies would do is that they would just list all the different kinds of sugars, and because each one was in a small proportion, people reading the label said, this is mostly flour and not too much sugar. In the new labeling system, they can't do that. So they're going to have to list all the sugars together. They can put in brackets if there are different types of them, but that allows people to look at that product and say, aha, this product is mostly sugar, followed by some flour, followed by vegetable oil shortening, followed by, and so on and so on and so on. And I think that that's a lot more informative for people, particularly when we're trying to choose products that have less sugar. Another very important thing when you're with regard to labeling and when you're in the grocery store is that you have to be careful of labels that are misleading. And every company out there wants their product to look healthy. And so there are a couple things to watch out for. One of them is looking for whole wheat products. And we talked about this last day, that whole wheat products are definitely much healthier than products in which they've stripped the bran and the germ part of that seed out. Now this particular loaf was called whole grain loaf. That was the title of it. And they can call it whole grain loaf because somewhere in the list of ingredients they do put whole wheat flour in it. Now if you didn't look at the list of ingredients, you might think that the entire thing was made out of whole grain flour, but in fact it's not. And when you look at the list of ingredients, the number one ingredient is enriched wheat flour, and of course we know that that's white flour. So really, this particular loaf, even though the title of the loaf, the name of the loaf is whole grain loaf, we know that it's mostly not made from whole grains. It does have some content in it, which means that the label is legal. It just means that it is misleading. So whenever you're trying to choose something that has whole grains in it, if that's your goal, look at the list of ingredients, and the number one ingredient should say whole wheat flour or whole grain flour or whole grain rye flour or whatever it is, right? So you need to have that word whole right at the very beginning. The other thing to be careful of is nutrient or health claims. So they will smack a health claim on their product. This is a light product, for example. But what they don't tell you is legally that product could be light in anything. It could be light in fat, it could be light in calories, it could be light in color. They've added less dye to it. It could be light in texture. It tastes light. And of course, I think that the goal is for you to think that this is more nutritious, but maybe not necessarily. Here are some other examples, and there's lots of them. I've just picked out a few. This was by Marketplace, which is a Canadian CBC show that looked at misleading labels, and here were a couple from their particular show. So Kraft Dinner Smart, that makes you think this is a smart product. It must be nutritious. It even includes an omega-3 option, which Kraft promotes as a way to get omega-3 fatty acids that has been linked, to better health, especially brain health. And it says, no artificial flavors or anything like that. So it must be nutritious. The thing about the omega-3 option is that a person would have to eat approximately 177 servings to ingest the same amount of omega-3 fatty acid found in just a single piece of fish. And so, what this is saying is, yes, it has omega-3, but does it really have enough to be a source for omega-3? No, not at all. You're much better to eat just one piece of fish as opposed to 177 servings of Kraft Dinner to get your omega-3s, and that's the misleading part. Here's another example. This is Maple Leaf's Natural Selections. It has no added preservatives. In fact, actually, if you look at the ingredients, it does contain nitrite, which is a preservative. It may be considered, it occurs in nature, and maybe that's why they can use the word natural. But that is a preservative that's linked to cancer, according to the Canadian Cancer Society. And it is in there in the form of cultured celery extract. And that is a nitrite. So they haven't labeled it as a nitrite. It's listed as cultured celery extract, but that's what it is. Here's another one. This is an Oasis juice drink. It's called Cholest Prevent, and it's intended, this is according to the company, intended for people who are concerned about their cholesterol level in their blood, or have a family history of high cholesterol. But again, when you break this down, in order to gain the required health benefits, a person would need to drink 2 glasses of this every day. And that works out to about 1.5 kilograms of sugar that you would be consuming every month. And of course, the health benefits of drinking 2 glasses of this every day are certainly overshadowed by the real health risk of eating 1.5 kilograms of sugar per month. So, you know, that again, that's misleading. So you need to look at these things with an educated eye and beware of those nutrient claims. Best to look right at the list of ingredients and make your choices from those labels. Okay, so how do we be sure that we are consuming nutrients in the right quantity and balance? And I call this the riddle of the food pyramid. Every single country has a food pyramid and you know, different methods of telling us how much of each type of food that we should eat. Certainly it's going to be very time consuming if we have to actually add them all up. There are, Health Canada does make recommendations. These are called the Health Canada Dietary Reference Intakes, and these are recommendations on the amount of each nutrient that we should eat. The values are based on age and gender. They have recommended dietary allowances. This is the average daily intake level that would meet the minimum requirements of most healthy individuals in a specific age group. Sometimes they'll give adequate intake, which is the recommended intake if they don't have enough evidence to really make a strong recommended dietary allowance. And for some nutrients like sodium or sugar, they give a UL value, a tolerable upper intake level. So that's really the maximum daily that you should be eating without health risks. So you can look up, there are tables of this, and I will post these in Brightspace if you're interested. And what you could do is you could, you know, write down all the food that you eat, all of your different nutrients. You could put them into a database. You could come out with your 3-day average, your 2 weekdays and 1 weekend day, and then you could compare those values with Health Canada's recommended dietary allowances, and then you could see whether or not, you know, you are consuming. So here's a 3-day average for somebody. So we can see, okay, are we meeting their recommendations for carbohydrates? Are we having, in this case, too much sugar, too much saturated fat, too much trans fatty acids, they're deficient in water, and so on. So this is very educational. Nutritionists will do this when they're trying to evaluate a person's diet initially, and there's value in doing that maybe once, but this doesn't really help us day to day. So Health Canada came up with Canada's Food Guide to help us kind of give a rough estimate of recommendations for nutrients. And so if we follow their food guide, and their food guide is based on 4 different food groups: vegetables and fruits, grain products, milk and alternatives, and meat and alternatives. And the idea is to get a specific number of servings from each group. I've tried to use this, the Canada Food Guide. I think that there's a couple problems. One is that it's not really up to our latest scientific evidence, and they're working on trying to improve the food guide. My personal opinion is that we need to scrap the serving sizes. One of the really big issues is we have no idea what Health Canada considers a serving. I shouldn't say we have no idea. They do have a list, but what I end up finding is that I'm consuming foods that are not on their list, and I don't know, you know, how much is that as far as a serving goes. The other issue with this is that it won't tell you if you are eating too much of something. So it will tell you if you are, you know, meeting its minimum requirements, but it doesn't give you an idea if you're consuming something in excess. And again, this takes quite a lot of time to plan a menu. So what can we do? I think the best tool that is out there right now is created by nutrition experts at Harvard University, and it's really designed to use a simple format to help people make good eating choices. And the best tool that I found is the healthy eating plate. So what they do is they take a plate and they divide it into proportions, and they say, when you have a meal, just make sure that you're getting this amount within your meal of these things. And they give some guidelines. So picture your plate in front of you. You know, about a quarter of the plate should be some sort of healthy protein. And they give you the best choices: fish, poultry, beans, nuts. Red meat, yes, but limited, so not every single day of the week. Cheese, yes, but again, limited. And only occasionally have processed meats, and that's because of that nitrite preservative that's contained in those particular meats. A quarter of your plate should be whole grains. And that could be whole grain pasta or whole grain bread or whole grain rice, and limit the white refined grains like white rice and white bread. About a half of your plate should be fruits and vegetables. And they just say the more the better, and aim for a whole variety of colors, because the different colors will contain different nutrients. Just by the way, in this scenario, potatoes don't count because they do have such a high glycemic index that they're kind of like eating cake. Avoid the trans fat of oils. Remember, that's my one bad food. Limit butter, but use healthy oils like olive and canola oil for cooking. Drink lots of water. Limit your milk to maybe 1 to 2 glasses per day. Limit juice. There's a ton of sugar in juice. And avoid all of the sugary drinks. Just by the way, a glass of juice has the same amount of sugar as a glass of Coca-Cola. So using this to create individual meals is really easy, and it just gives you an idea that you really need to think about plants as at least half of your meal, with some whole grains and some protein. And if we kind of reestablish our thinking by thinking, okay, half my meal is going to be vegetables and fruits, and then I'm going to throw some protein in because my body needs some of that. And then I need some, fiber, and I need some grains, and I'm going to try to make those whole grains. That's a simpler way to put together a menu than it is by counting individual nutrients. They've designed one for kids as well. Same idea, same proportions, but even in a kid's lunchbox, you could choose 1 fruit, 2 vegetables, 1 healthy protein, 1 whole grain, and you could even incorporate 1 dairy as well, as far as a glass of milk goes. And that would be a healthy lunch for that particular kid. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and then I'm going to do a part 2. So look for 2 different parts of this presentation.